Today we're going to talk about healthy eating, which no one's ever apparently talked about before. So we're treading new ground.
No one cares about healthy eating.
Nick, the curious patient here, and you're Dr. Ron Dummar.
Dr. Ron Dummar, yeah. And I'm curious about this idea of when plants grow, when they sprout, when they bloom, and the ideal time for each of them, right? Now, different times around the world, you could see plants have a different, maybe a different cycle as far as when they'll bloom, when they'll produce fruit, right? And when they bring their food to crop, essentially. So I'm really curious about how this affects us as individuals throughout the world, and how we should be eating these foods. Should we be eating just our favorite foods all the time? Or should we really be eating the foods in our environment that are actually blooming and cycling and then producing fruit in the time that they're producing the fruit?
I think
Is there a benefit to that? I don't know.
Well,
we'll see.
I hope you know, because that's why I'm here to ask you. I think we've all wondered that, right? You hear eat local, eat seasonal, and you know that peaches are good at a certain time of year, and then apples are good at a certain time of year. But whether that's just a nice thing to know so you can eat that tomato at the right time of year,
yeah,
or whether it's better for your body, I've never considered that.
Well, and why would it be better for your body is the question, right? People want to know first, why would we even need to consider something like that? Well, you need to ask, first of all, is if I'm going to get my favorite food and it happens to be out of season, where am I going to be getting that from?
Mexico?
Yeah, Mexico, Chile, some other place that's growing it. Could be all the way on the other side of the world. Have you ever traveled to those regions or those locations? Have you ever gotten sick when you've been to any of those regions or locations?
Maybe somebody else has.
Yeah. And so they've had that type of experience, and often that's because you're acclimating or attempting to acclimate yourself to the local biotic culture, right? So just for one idea, you have a plant that's growing in a fauna or a biotic culture in one region of the world, and you ship it to an entirely different region of the world. It's not the same makeup of biotics. Biotics, we're learning a lot that it plays a significant role in our immune response, in our health responses, our neurological synapses, the way our brain functions, our mood, and everything, right? So if I'm taking something that's completely supposed to be helping me acclimate myself to a different region of the world, I'm eating it all year long, but I'm in a totally different region of the world. How's that benefiting me for my local environment?
You're blowing my mind here.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, because I thought, eat local, eat seasonal. It sounds good. Obviously, I want to support my neighbors.
Support a local farmer.
Right, yeah. And that sounds good, and I want to do it.
It is good.
But to think that avocado from Mexico, which I don't really feel guilty buying, but I'm like, well, I know it's not local. Maybe folks out there don't eat avocados. I don't know. I think they're delicious. But what I'm saying is I never thought about the biome. So continue on.
Well, yeah, exactly. So the biome is the key, and we're learning so much, even within our own bodies. We're learning about how much biotics are so critical to our health. I read a paper recently, and it said, look, if you took, let's say aliens land on the Earth, and they basically completely dissected us and broke us down to our very tiny, small parts, they would determine that we were ultimately just biota. We were just a biome. That's all our body is made up of. So we have I think it's something like 1 million human cells in our body, but we have 24 trillion biotic cells in our body.
What is that? I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole, but what does that even mean?
Yeah, well, it means that the majority of the function of the makeup of our physiology is actually bacteria. It's a species. It's a harmony of living species creating our physiology. That's what it is. And so what we want to do is subsist and create a harmony in our local environment. And that is why we would say eat local. Because if I have, people often develop allergies. Allergy treatments are commonly, well, we're going to give you a small amount of this and develop a desensitization to it, right? Well, another way of desensitizing yourself to something is sending a whole bunch of bees around your local environment, having them make some sort of product that, maybe they throw their pollen into and they throw their bacteria into that they just collected from around your entire environment. And then they produce and give you something known as honey, right? So we use honey in our office a lot to actually help people alleviate their symptoms of allergies and even alleviate their allergies completely.
So that's why you would recommend spending the extra on your local honey? Is that right? Like here in Utah,
local honey.
Utah honey?
Yeah, honey is so fascinating when you look at the research even. And I could dive into a whole bunch of these different things. We're really wanting to talk about seasonal eating, but this is a really critical piece for me as to why we should feel motivated to eat locally and to eat foods in their season. Is because if we're eating foods in the season, it really means that it's more likely that we're eating locally. If we're eating foods out of season, it's far more likely that we're eating foods from a totally different flora, fauna than we're in right now.
And how far out can we go? Is a Florida orange too far away?
Well, in our modern society, honestly, we all enjoy food from all over the place all the time. And I am the same way myself. What I do like to do in my own practice, in my office, and with my patients is to encourage as much local and as much seasonal as possible. So like grow a garden, right? Have some plants, have some herbs, have things that you are that are on your local environment, in your local environment, and on that time frame, right, of your sleep-wake cycles and your sunset, sunrise cycles, right? Your biorhythms. Some plant that's functioning in the same regard as you are, and then take sustenance from that as frequently as possible.
So can we, without going too far down the rabbit hole, reinforce to me why that's important again?
Yeah.
Because you said a lot of fancy words, and I dig it, but why should I do that physiologically or biologically to benefit myself?
So again, we talked about the bees. We talked about the local environment. If you look at everywhere throughout the world, we know that there's arid deserts. We know that there's really, I don't know all the terms for things, I guess, with geography or but we know there's super, super high mountains, right? And that has a very specific region of plants, a grouping of plants that will grow at that level. Right, and there's a reason for that. And then we also know that the arid, dry places versus the, near the beach, all these things have their own flora, fauna, right? And you can actually immunize yourselves to potential local biotic invasions via eating locally, right? So it's like you're becoming a part of your environment. So if you're living in an environment that is like let's say a jungle tropical region, and then you're only eating like cactus and things that are of a more arid region and environment, well, that's not really typical of your current situation, right? So it's not supporting you or even harmonizing you with your local environment. So the idea really is to become a part of your environment, because you are. Like our skin, our physiology, our body is synonymous with the earth, with the ground, with the minerals. If we have mineral dysfunction in our body, we have a significant physiological change that occurs, right? So we need these things in our local environment. And so in order for us to, say, thrive in health, we should do as much as possible as we can from our local environment.
Okay. I think I'm there. I think there's more to talk about.
So here's one more thing. So let's say, because people are going to ask, well, but I like I like this plant. Or what about corn? I like corn.
Or what about, let's go all the way down smoothie land, like goji berries or
any
cacao
of these things,
or
right?
coffee from, Guatemala. Like, there's so many things that we consume from all over.
All over the world. It's our modern society. And it's a great thing, right? Because we can get things when they're not in season. And we love that. Well, great. We can have our favorite meals and we can have it throughout the year whenever we want. So, yeah, that's a luxury that not very many people throughout history have been able to afford. But what we can do and what we should do now also is say, okay, well, I have a seed, right? Let's take a seed. I could actually plant that seed anywhere on earth if I nurtured it properly. Some places I drop that seed, it'll just grow, right? Like if I maybe even Southern California, some place is nice and moist and warm. And we did some growing when I was in my medical training in Southern California. We had a little garden boxes in the back. We literally had like a 5x10 yard in the back. We dug it up and brought in a bunch of soil and everything. But things would grow like crazy. We grew a pumpkin, put a seed in the ground. I literally had to push it with my thumb. And then we left for 2 weeks because we had a break between semesters. Come back, and this pumpkin was massive, right? It was huge. It was like weighing down this vining gate that we had built for it. And so things grow differently in different environments. I think that's a question for us to explore on another level, but that's because of the local environment. And the richness and the supply that is needed for that plant to subsist, right? And the struggle that plant goes through gives it a certain quality of strength that it can provide for you as well in that environment.
By consuming it?
Yeah, you consume it, right? Yeah, you would consume it to say, okay, this plant, this bush, let's say you go into an arid region, it's like really hard, not a lot of plants there. They don't really grow very well, but certain plants have learned to subsist there, like cactus, right? Certain plant like sage, they've learned to subsist in those environments. It's like, okay, well, if I can learn or take some of that physiology into my physiology, then I can subsist a lot better in an arid, dry environment.
Is this Dr. Dummar's theory, or is there a lot more to it? Because I'm like, does that mean if I live in the desert, I'm supposed to eat cacti? See, now I'm just a little confused.
So the other thing, this is where we're going to, is you can take a seed, right? And you can culture those seeds in the ground locally where you are, right? So, but if you take a seed and you put it in California, Southern California, versus say a high desert of Utah, it's going to take a whole lot more care in Utah to get that seed to come to develop fruit than it is in Southern California, right? Which is why we have those orange groves in Florida and Southern California and places like that. And we don't necessarily have those orange groves all over the place in high desert regions.
Let's get to news you can use.
Okay, let's do it.
Seasonally, what do I want to look for? Does meat play into that?
Yes. So
as well, and not just plants?
If we're looking again, so what would be the season of meat? That's a good question, right? What would be the season of certain vegetables? What would be the season of fruit? So what would be the season of fruit? You think about an animal. Let's go for a bear, for instance. A bear hibernates, we know, during the winter. And so it's consuming, especially around the fall time, it starts to really consume a whole lot of calories, right? It's putting on a lot of calories. And one of the reasons is instinctually the bear knows that, well, there's a time coming when either it's going to hibernate or there's going to be a whole lot less plentiful food available for him to forage, or her, right? And so it's packing on those pounds and getting ready, literally in its own body, for the winter time. So if we look at that in our standpoint, when is fruit typically available? Fruit, which we know in the body has higher amounts of sugar, well, physiologically, it's a more of a complex carbohydrate, but it can turn a lot more likely into say, if we're breaking things down into sugar, it'll break down into fat, or it'll be packaged into fat if we have higher amounts of sugar in the body. So fat is a more dense molecule of energy for us, but we can also package sugars into fat molecules as well. So if we're consuming a lot higher amounts of sugar in the fall, that kind of makes sense for us to do that so we can get ready and have a lot more energy as we move into this time period of maybe a less abundance, right? But, well, fruit and food and veggies, dried lettuce and things aren't really always going to carry us completely all the way through the winter either. So what do we do then? Well, in that instance, we're looking for the season of meat. So the season of meat, if you look at it, there's been a lot of studies on meat, red meat especially, with the content of arachidonic acid being warmer or heat generating. People would call it inflammatory. Well, if it's cold and there's snow on the ground, wouldn't a little bit of inflammation be a beneficial thing for you? It'll help warm your physiology. It's going to provide a lot more minerals and nutrients for you as well. So the season of meat would necessarily, even though we have all of our barbecuing that happens in the summer, it's really the season of meat would be the fall, winter time.
Those Traeger grills in the caveman era were very popular.
Yeah, and they did them in the winter. Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay, the season of meat might be wintertime?
Yes.
All right, what about spring and summer? Can we start there?
Yeah, so in spring, if we're looking at spring, oftentimes it's things like your first little sprouts to come up. So eating a variety of different sprouts. You can even get a variety of different berries. It'll be kind of spring, summerish. But lettuce, believe it or not, is a spring food. That's something that you can consume a lot of in the spring.
What about the berries?
I love berries.
Does it depend on where you're at?
It is seasonally and when they come, right? So usually the berries will come a little bit later in the spring. So they'll be a little bit later, almost spring, summer, when your berries will come. But yeah, it's the berries are really, really good to consume. And I mentioned to you before, I think from more of a caveman standpoint, people often say, oh, no, they were just meat eaters. And I don't know. I think it's a whole lot easier to gather berries and fruit, and it's so much easier to gather things from plants that you can, you don't have to chase after and run and exert a whole ton of energy for than it is to actually get meat. Now, however,
it's harder to cook than it is to get berries.
Yeah, it's so much easier to get berries. Sorry, I forgot to unplug that one today.
He's a busy man. Phone's ringing. Patients are calling.
That's the way it happens sometimes.
People need help. While you take care of that, so we've got berries in the spring. We've got lettuce as well. I just can't help but think how I've heard about cookbooks and heard people talk about local and seasonal, and never realized that there could be more to it. And then you sort of think maybe instinctually or in our gut, we probably want to, we'll just take a pause.
I'm sorry.
You're good. Oh, is it an important call? Do you need to take it? No. He just disconnects the phone.
All right, there we go. So in the summer.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1. Should we do the summer?
So berries and lettuce in the spring. What about summer?
Yeah, so berries are kind of that transition. They're later spring, summer, right? And then the nice thing about berries is that they can continue to produce throughout the summer and even into the fall, right? So in summer, this is when I would say even maybe a little later, like summer to fall, and it depends on your growing, like what's your season like? Some people in some regions can actually plant and get corn in summer. Now for us in this region, our corn, we don't really harvest corn until later, which is like October even. So it's definitely fall time when for us. But some people in certain regions can plant corn early enough that they can start getting it in say June even. So June, July. So summer, typically the foods of summer though would be like grapes, green beans, melons even. You could have things like eggplants or figs, things like that. But corn is definitely one of those two.
And if you have questions about what is local or seasonal, go to your farmer's market, talk to local farmers, and you'll know that it's grown there because it's grown there. And if it was grown there, then it was grown for a reason because it could survive and thrive, and that's part of your local ecosystem.
That's part of the benefit of buying locally. Yeah, it's not just, it's a great thing to support your local commerce. And that's what a lot of people, when they say eat local, buy local, shop local, a lot of it's commerce related. But what we're doing today too is we're flipping that coin a little bit and saying, you don't just eat local for commerce reasons, which is good, but also eat local for your own health reasons, because it's going to benefit you. It's going to be a benefit to you physiologically and help you in the environment in which you live. I have patients that live in 3 different places throughout the year, right? So our modern society, our movement patterns are different than they've been throughout history. So there are a lot of nuances to what we're saying. We're speaking more towards an ideal. The ideal is eat food in the region that you are, right? And if you want to acclimate yourself to a certain region, well, eat food grown in that region. Eat honey, I would even say. If you can find honey, we talked about this earlier before, but if you can eat honey within a region that you go to that was produced in that region, it's going to acclimate you to that region as quickly as possible because, well, you've just consumed a product that has the biotic culture and pollen and amino acids from all over that region because the bees have basically flown on everything.
So honey's got sugar in it, but you're saying honey's okay?
Honey is great. Yeah, so honey has sugar on it. Now, I'm going to say something right here that's going to blow your minds. And when I say this to you, I say this to my patients too, and they go, what? So honey is actually a blood sugar regulator. Honey is not. So some people look at honey and they say, oh my gosh, this is going to spike my blood sugar. Well, it'll help your blood sugar, right? It'll if your blood sugar is low, yeah, it's going to help regulate and bring your blood sugar up. And there is definitely lots of sugar in honey. But the product that the bees make versus the product that you buy on the shelf, totally different. Completely and entirely different. Okay? When you're looking at the shelf, you're literally just getting like the glucose, the sucrose, just that product. And so if you buy, say, the honey bear off the shelf, you know that what you're getting in that product, and you're also getting some dye, by the way, too, so that it has a golden tint, because the product really is, it's a chemically synthetic product, so that it is only those very sweet, sugary substances, right? So that's all it is. So fruit sugars is fructose. That's what we get from fruit, but we get different sugars from honey. But when you eat honey directly from the hive, or when you eat raw, local, organic honey,
so what am I looking for on the label? Tell me that first, and then I don't want to interrupt you, but how do I know it's this honey, this special nectar?
I know, labeling is such an issue.
If it says local Utah honey.
So what I would do, this is what I would do, and this is what I do myself. I look for a local, somebody who has bees.
Like in your community.
Mm-hmm. I look for somebody. Now it's really easy because we can get on Ask, like a local group. We can find a local group and say, hey.
On Facebook.
On Facebook.
Your neighborhood thing, okay.
And we just say, hey, does anybody have bees? Does anybody keep bees around here? Or where's the local beekeeper? There's beekeepers in every community. And so you just ask, who's the local beekeeper? Can I buy honey that's produced locally and organically here? And you can do that. You could and then I would go get the honey from them. Usually they'll sell it in a bucket or in jars or however much you want. I buy mine in buckets because we use a lot of honey. But that way you're getting amino acids, you're getting probiotics, you're getting the local flora.
Probiotics from honey?
Yeah.
You're blowing my mind.
Yeah. I'm telling you, honey's like a complete food group, my friend, to me.
So if you were on an island and they said if you could have one food for the rest of your life, that hypothetical question.
I would do honey.
You would do honey?
Honey, 100%.
I was thinking bacon or hamburgers.
There's a indigenous tribe that 90% of the consumption is honey. Like they consume honey all the time, copious amounts of it, lots of it, right? And it provides amino acids for the liver to be able to take those amino acids and make proteins so they can make hormones and all sorts of building blocks for everything that's needed in our body. Honey, made from the bees in the natural environment, is an incredibly beneficial source of food and nourishment for us.
So I cut you off earlier trying to get the labeling right. Did you give the full explanation of its medical benefits?
So for labeling, what I would say is you're looking for local, organic, raw, those kinds of things, right? If you're just looking at the label and you're not looking directly at a beekeeper.
Can honey be consumed year-round?
Yes, if you store it, yeah. Because honey can be stored so well.
Well, we talked about seasonality, and the bees aren't making honey in the wintertime.
Yes.
So where does that fit in?
So in the winter, that's like the storage. The same thing with we would dry plants so that we can try to get through the winter. So we would dry plants, and then hopefully those plants last us long enough to where we can get some meat to carry us over a little bit longer. So between plants and then meat, but honey provides you with amino acids, with all the probiotics. You still have the biotics in your area locally, right? And honey's still providing that for you, even though it's, say, the bees provide that or produce it throughout the spring, summer, fall, and then they go dormant, right? And then they come back up again. So even though that's the way it functions with honey, it doesn't mean we don't eat that food. If we take it and we store it, we can consume it during the winter to provide sustenance. We can't just eat snow either, but we could find, we could go out and find some. What would I do in the winter? That's what you're asking me.
I'm just looking for things to take away.
I would break through the ice and I would fish.
Okay.
So that would be a really good thing to consume if you're we're almost talking about wilderness survival at this point, right? But it's ideal things are meat in the winter. That's the time for meat, right? So if you can get fish, if you can get red meat, if you can get quail, if you can get field mice, if you can get any of these things, right? And I'm talking survival stuff. You took my brain into survival, right? But that's the food of the winter. But when we're talking about consuming honey or consuming plants through the winter, we're talking about storage. We're talking about drying. We're talking about preserving, or even like bottling fruits. They're grown locally in your environment still. You bottle them, you put them away, so that you can consume them during the winter.
I feel like this is a bit of an appetizer.
Yeah.
Because we're running out of time and there's more to talk about. But I think what I've taken away is raw organic honey is the bee's knees.
There you go.
To mix metaphors or whatever that was. And then go to your farmer's market and just get a sense of what's being grown.
Yeah. Locally, fresh.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone knows if you get something fresh, regardless of where it's from, even just getting it more fresh, freshly produced, freshly picked, freshly caught. The closer you can get it from, this is the principle, from field to table or from ocean to table, right? The closer you can get it from picked or caught to your plate, the better it's going to be for you too.
Any final tips on how to do that in the most economic way possible? Because everyone's thinking, well, how much is it going to cost, right? It does cost more, I think, to eat high-quality local foods, and it should. It's the high-quality gasoline in your tank. But are there any tips in terms of how to save money? I imagine your local beekeeper probably is as competitive as the health food store.
Yeah, what you have to realize is that farmers have crops that they yield each year. And oftentimes these farmers markets, you can find them in some areas. You can find them on the side of the store or side of the road. They'll have a little store, like a stand. And you pull over there and you'll be surprised by how affordable it is. And so often people will say, oh, it is more expensive. And in reality, it probably is. But it's more expensive down the road to actually pay for the medical problems and the dysfunction in physiology than if you had just supported that physiology with good quality foods, right?
And you've seen that in your practice.
Oh, we see it all the time.
Like highly successful, this is the way I want to make myself feel better, but highly successful people who didn't pay attention to their nutrition or mental health.
Yeah, well, yeah, mental health is a huge thing now too. But yeah, we think, okay, I'm strong, and this is the foible of youth, right? I'm invincible, and I should be able to do all of these things, and we forget about all of the support that we really need. We forget about a supportive community. We forget about a supportive tribe. We forget about putting good people around us. We forget about supporting our body physiologically with good nutrients because we think we're capable, or that we should be capable, of living and sustaining without that support. It's an interesting foible. It's this invincibility flaw, so to speak. And we behave like we're invincible when we're younger.
Until we're proven.
Yeah.
Until it's proven to us that we're not. That's its own trip.
Until we're slapped up against the face with some illness or some mental health issue, then we finally have to go, whoa, I need to get healthier. For a lot of people, it was recently COVID. COVID said, whoa, woke them up. Said, man, something could come through here. And what do we know? The main thing, or the significant group that was affected in a very big way, were people who had already pre-existing conditions, who had autoimmune related issues, right? So those people who were already basically in a state of dysfunction, or that weren't healthy, they were the ones that were going to be selected to first be picked off. And not to be morbid about it, but that was the realization that came to them, right? The realization was, whoa, I need to get myself and my act together now in a health way so that I can promote myself and the things I want to do and my dreams and my future forward.
We went a little off topic there, but it makes so much sense to me. Our time is up, Dr. Ron Dummar. This is the Be Well Now podcast. We're focusing on wellness. We're focusing on being in the present, and we've spanned the range of nutrition to spirituality. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, that was not exactly at all where I had intended for that to go. So
I took us there, though.
It was very interesting, and I think there's a lot to be researched and studied. There's a lot of depth in what we said today, and I hope that people see the actual value in eating locally and becoming more of an integral part of your environment, and actually being a participant in the things that you buy, in the places that you shop, and in the food that you consume.
And this is timeless advice. And so our hope is that we get listeners. We've been very committed weekly to record and publish podcasts. And even if it's 3 years from now that someone hears this, find us on social media, bewellnowpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what questions you have. if you have any thoughts on what to eat. We're here. We're going to stay committed to this podcast, and we want a conversation.
We're doing it. Yeah, speak out. Ask us questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. We're good to go.
Namaste.
Namaste.